Everyone thought the wedding planner was worried about flowers. Mara was staring at one chair, one name, one meal preference. One guest who had arrived on paper after the doors were already locked. 11:18 p.m., the night before the wedding. The private dining room at the Falcone estate was full of men who carried weapons and one woman who carried a clipboard, and only one of those things was about to matter. Nico Falcone, Don of the family, older brother of the groom, sat at the head of the table with his security chief, Livia Bellandi, beside him in a robe over her fitting dress, and Carlo Bellandi, leaning back in his chair, with the specific comfort of a man who had never once worried about being asked a hard question. Mara walked in holding a seating chart with one corner folded from being checked too many times. The black event blazer sat snug across her full figure, radio clipped to one lapel, 3 pens tucked into the pocket because she had learned years ago that people noticed her body before they noticed her system. Nico did not look up. "If this is about flowers, Miss Ellis, choose the expensive ones and let the adults work." Mara set the chart on the table. "It's not the flowers." Carlo smiled. "Then what is it? Napkins?" Mara took out her red pen and circled one seat. "Table 7, seat 4. She said, "Who is Livia Carbone?" Sophia frowned. "We don't have a Livia Carbone." The security chief checked his copy of the guest list. "She's on here." "Not until 8:43 tonight," Mara said. Nico finally looked up. She set down 3 more pages, the RSVP log, the meal preference sheet, the bodyguard placement chart. Her name was added after the final print. Her meal was changed 11 minutes later. Your south sightline was moved 6 minutes after that. Nico stood. "What are you saying?" Mara looked at him directly. "You don't have a guest problem," she said. "You have an assassin with a dinner reservation. Cut to 4 days earlier." Mara arrived at the Falcone estate to finalize the wedding plan and found Nico in the middle of a security briefing, which told her something about how this family approached weddings before anyone said a word. The estate itself was the kind of beautiful that took money seriously. Marble floors that had never seen a scuff, a ballroom under construction for the reception, scaffolding draped in white fabric like a body being prepared. Security men in dark suits moving through hallways with the specific economy of people who had done this before and expected to do it again. She set her folder on the table without waiting to be invited. "I need the final guest list, the family tree, the floor plan, the allergy list, the service route, the armed guard no-go zones, the processional timing." Nico looked at her like she had interrupted something more important. "You're planning my brother's wedding, not a coup." "In your family," Mara said, "is there a difference?" He didn't laugh, but he remembered it. She saw it land, a small flicker behind otherwise controlled eyes. The look of a man filing away a sentence he hadn't expected to hear from the person his family had hired to choose tablecloths for Matteo and Sophia's day. In the meeting, Carlo introduced her to the room as the flower girl with spreadsheets. 2 capos laughed. Mara did not react to the laughter. She had heard versions of this joke at every event she had ever staffed for families like this. Families who paid extraordinary sums for precision and then assumed precision required no intelligence to produce. She looked at the family seating draft pinned to the wall and asked, "Do you want your father seated within speaking distance of the cousin he exiled? Or are we pretending seating arrangements don't start wars?" The laughter stopped. One of the capos, who had laughed loudest a moment earlier, looked, briefly, like a man recalculating. Sophia, seated at the far end of the table in a robe thrown over her fitting dress, looked at Mara for the first time with something other than polite disinterest. Carlo recovered quickly. "It's a wedding, Miss Ellis. Not a tribunal. Every wedding in a family like yours is both," Mara said. "I just get paid for one of them." She did not wait for a response. She turned back to her folder and kept working, because the work did not care whether the room liked her, and she had learned a long time ago that liking came after results, not before. Mara built the seating chart the way she built every chart for families like this, as a map of who could stand to be near whom, and who would start a feud over a centerpiece if seated wrong. Falcone family on the left side of the room, Bellandi on the right. The younger members wanted proximity to power. The older members wanted to keep their rank visible. A capo placed at a lower table would read it as an insult that outlasted the wedding by years. An exiled cousin could not be allowed within walking distance of the Bellandi patriarch's table. The toast could not happen before both families' security teams confirmed clearance. Because an early toast triggered alliance language neither side wanted activated under threat. She had built dozens of these charts over her career. For families who measured affection in proximity and grievance in distance. Most people who hired her thought a wedding planner's job was aesthetic. They never asked why she requested family trees going back 3 generations, or why she cared more about who had been excommunicated from holiday gatherings than about flower arrangements. She said to her assistant, a quiet young man named Tobias who had learned not to ask too many questions, "A wedding is just a war where everyone pretends the flowers make them polite." He wrote it down. He always wrote down the things she said that sounded like rules because they usually were. Sophia found her during a dress fitting, standing in front of a mirror in a gown she had not chosen the color of, in a house she had not chosen to live in, marrying a man, Matteo, Nico's younger brother. She had met only twice before the engagement was announced over family dinner. She asked, "Do you believe in weddings like this?" Mara looked up from her clipboard. "I believe in people surviving events they didn't choose." Sophia was quiet for a moment. The seamstress adjusted a pin near her waist, and she didn't flinch, which told Mara something about how long Sophia had been practicing not flinching. "Everyone else asks if I'm happy," Sophia said, "or tells me I should be grateful for the alliance. No one's asked if I'm going to survive it. Are you?" "I don't know yet." It was the first time anyone in this house had answered her honestly about anything, and Mara filed that the way she filed everything, carefully, in the part of her mind reserved for people worth paying attention to. The first anomaly appeared 2 days before the wedding. A guest note, modified, "No shellfish, no champagne." Seat moved closer to table 7. RSVP accepted 3 days past the deadline window. The name attached wasn't alarming yet. Distant cousins arrived late to weddings all the time, claimed by marriage rather than blood, vouched for by someone too important to question closely. The pattern was what caught her attention, the specificity of the dietary restriction, the precision of the seat change, the convenient timing of an RSVP that arrived just inside the window where no one would think to scrutinize it. Mara circled it in red and kept working The way she circled a dozen small inconsistencies in any given week that usually turned out to mean nothing. She did not yet know this one meant everything. The night before the wedding, Mara reviewed the final printed guest list against her working copy, the way she did before every event, because printed copies sometimes diverged from working copies in ways that mattered. A name appeared that had not been there 24 hours earlier, Livia Carbone. She was not on the Bellandi family tree. She was not on the Falcone tree. Her RSVP timestamp was logged after the official lock. Her meal preference had been edited with the kind of precision that suggested someone had thought carefully about which dish to avoid. Her guest badge had been printed before her RSVP was technically approved, which meant someone with badge access had known she was coming before the system did. And the kitchen route notes included a special plate flag tied to her table. The no shellfish note hadn't been written to protect Livia from anything on the menu. It had been written to give her a documented reason to receive a special plate, routed through the exact handoff point where Vittorio Bellandi's own plate would pass. Mara went to Sophia. "Carbone was my grandmother's maiden name," Sophia said. "Half the city uses it when they want to sound related to us without being checked too closely. Would your father allow someone using that name to sit at table 7? Sophia thought about it. Not unless he wanted to insult someone on purpose. Table 7 is close to the family table. It's a position of trust. Mara understood. The seat had not been a mistake. It had been a decision made by someone who knew exactly what that proximity meant. She brought the chart to Nico. This was the scene from the cold open, the dining room, the red circle, the question that made Nico stand up from the table. He was not fully convinced. The security chief said, "We can remove the guest before tomorrow. Then whoever placed her will know we saw the chair," Mara said. "You don't catch a killer by moving the bait before you know the hook." Nico looked at her differently than he had 4 days ago. Nico's first instinct was guards. More of them. Tighter formation. A second perimeter around the head table. The instinct of a man who had spent his entire adult life believing that danger arrived as a person with a weapon, and that the answer to a person with a weapon was always more people with bigger weapons. Mara stopped him before he could give the order. "If this were about a gun," she said, "the chair would face your brother and Sophia. It faces the service pass." She spread the floor plan across the table and pointed to seat 4 at table 7. Its sight line ran directly to the kitchen service door. The route every plate, every tray, every piece of staff movement passed through during dinner service. It had no sight line at all to the head table where Matteo and Sophia would be seated for the duration of the meal. "Close enough to swap a plate," she said. "Far enough to disappear during the toast, when every camera and every guard in the room is pointed at the happy couple instead of the side tables." Nico studied the plan. "Then who is the target?" Mara looked at Sophia, who had gone very still. "Not the groom, Father Matteo. No relation to the groom by name only. The family's longtime confessor, who would officiate the ceremony and witness the alliance contract," explained the part Mara hadn't known, the part that turned a seating anomaly into something with the power to start a war. The alliance between Falcone and Bellandi was not sealed by the vows. It was sealed by the final toast, the moment after the ceremony when both family heads raised a glass together in front of witnesses, and the contract language activated. Until that moment, the marriage was a social event. After it, the marriage was a binding territorial agreement, with retaliation clauses written into language that predated either Matteo or Sofia's birth. If Don Vittorio Bellandi died before that toast, at the Falcone family's own wedding, at a table inside Falcone's own estate, the marriage would not bind the families together. The alliance would void. The Bellandi family would have every justification to believe Falcone had orchestrated the death to seize Bellandi territory before the ink dried on an agreement that would have made such seizure impossible. The retaliation clause would activate automatically, without need for further proof. Bellandi assets would freeze pending a war council. If Vittorio died before the toast, Carlo became emergency successor under Bellandi crisis rules. If he died after the toast, Sofia's marriage locked Carlo out of succession forever. The timing was not incidental. It was the entire plan, and the most likely candidate to step into emergency leadership of a Bellandi family, suddenly without its patriarch, and at war with its newest ally, was the man currently sitting across the table, insisting, loudly and often, that the wedding should be postponed for safety. Carlo, Mara said it plainly. So the killer doesn't need to kill anyone at the altar. She needs your father to die while sitting at a Falcone table before the toast. That's not an assassination. That's an act of war disguised as a tragedy. The room was quiet. Nico looked at Carlo for a long moment before anyone spoke again. She went to the kitchen with head chef Elena Vale, who had run this kitchen for 11 years and took the accusation, however indirect, as a personal insult. "No one poisons food in my kitchen," Elena said, arms crossed, standing between Mara and her ovens like she expected an actual physical challenge. "Then help me prove it happens after the plate leaves you," Mara said. That landed differently than an accusation would have. Elena's posture shifted from defensive to focused. They went through everything together. The allergy notes cross-referenced against actual dietary needs, the special plate cards and who had requested them, the staff assignments for the reception, the timing windows for each course, the tray routes that ran from kitchen to floor through a single choke point, the service pass. Every plate had a documented chain of custody from the moment it was prepared to the moment it reached a table. Elena's kitchen itself was clean. Nothing in her domain showed signs of tampering or unauthorized access. The vulnerability was the handoff, the service pass, where kitchen staff set trays down for floor staff to collect, created a window, 11 to 14 seconds, during the busiest service intervals, when a tray sat unattended in a high-traffic area that dozens of people passed through without anyone tracking who touched what. 14 seconds was enough to compromise a single plate without disturbing anything else on the tray. Elena looked at the timing chart Mara had built and went pale. "I've worked in this kitchen for 11 years, she said. "I never thought to time the handoff." "Most people don't," Mara said. "That's exactly why it works." Security caught a man posing as a server with a concealed knife at midnight. He had walked into the staff entrance with forged credentials and a kitchen uniform that fit slightly wrong at the shoulders. The kind of detail that would have passed casual inspection but failed the moment anyone who actually worked in that kitchen looked twice. A guard had looked twice. The man was disarmed and removed within 90 seconds, loudly enough that half the security team heard about it before the sun came up. Nico thought the threat was resolved. Mara did not. "That man was loud enough to be caught," she said. Standing in the security office at 1 in the morning, with the floor plan still spread across the table. The chart is still quiet. She had seen this pattern before, in smaller forms, at smaller events. A visible threat designed to be found, calibrated specifically to absorb attention and relax vigilance once it was neutralized, while the real plan continued moving through channels too quiet to trip any alarm. A magician's misdirection dressed up as an assassination attempt. "If someone wanted us to feel safe again," she said, "catching that man was the easiest way to make it happen." The security chief looked unconvinced at first, but for the first time that week, Tobias stopped arguing with the planner and started repeating her instructions to armed men. The chief noticed and said nothing further, which was, from him, a kind of agreement. Nico looked at her for a long moment and then told his men to maintain the same posture they'd held before the knife was found. Carlo kept suggesting the wedding be postponed. He framed it as concern for Sophia's safety, raised at intervals throughout the evening, always pitched loud enough for the room to hear, and always phrased in a way that made refusal sound careless. He brought it up at dinner. He brought it up in the hallway outside the bridal suite. He brought it up again during the final security briefing, with an urgency that struck Mara as performed rather than felt. She found that interesting in the specific way that overperformed concern was always interesting. People who were genuinely afraid usually did not announce their fear this consistently, this publicly, or this conveniently in line with their own interests. Mara had full access to the event management system. Guest list, seating chart, vendor routes, but not to estate security. The system logged terminal location alongside every chart edit, a feature she had specifically requested when she set it up 3 days earlier. That much she could read herself. The most recent change, the one that added Livia Carbone's name, adjusted her meal preference, and shifted the South Security sightline away from Table 7, had originated from a terminal in the estate's East study. Whether Carlo had been in that study at the right time was estate security data, not hers to pull. She brought the timestamp to Sophia instead. Sophia requested the East study door log from security under Bellandi authority. Nico approved it before his chief could object. The log placed Carlo in the East study 4 minutes before the edit timestamp. 4 minutes. Enough time to sit down, open the terminal, make 3 changes, and leave before anyone noticed the light under the door. Mara had not pulled the log herself. She had simply known which question to ask, and who had the standing to ask it. She did not confront him yet. She wrote it down, the way she wrote everything down, and kept working. Mara did not remove the assassin from the guest list. Instead, she changed what mattered: the plate route, the server assignment, the linen marker that flagged which seat received which dish, the camera angle on the service pass, the timing of the toast, and a duplicate plate prepared for Vittorio Bellandi that would never leave Elena's direct custody. Only Elena, Sophia, and Nico knew. If someone planned this through the chart, Mara said, "We use the chart to move them instead." Nico said, "And if you're wrong, then the wedding runs 10 minutes late." She looked at him. "If I'm right, the bride still has a father tomorrow." The ceremony began on schedule. White flowers, string quartet, a chapel small enough that every breath felt audible. Beautiful, the way everything in this family was beautiful, with the specific tension of beauty that had been built over something dangerous. The kind of room where you could feel the weight of armed men standing very still in formal clothes, pretending the day was only about love. Mara stood behind the curtain at the back with a headset, watching the room the way she had learned to watch every room, not for what it displayed, but for what moved through it without being noticed. Livia Carbone arrived precisely on schedule, dressed appropriately in a deep green gown that would not draw attention in a room full of formal wear, carrying herself with the particular stillness of someone trained not to draw attention. She greeted the people seated near her with practiced warmth. She admired the flowers. She did everything a guest was supposed to do. Carlo did not watch the bride during the vows. He watched the service door, glancing toward it at intervals that formed their own kind of rhythm, the rhythm of a man counting down to something. The security chief stood in the same compromised position he had occupied during the original briefing 4 days earlier, a habit Mara had flagged in writing, and that no one had bothered to correct, because old habits in old security teams died slower than new threats arrived. Nico, for one brief moment during the processional, looked not at the altar but at Mara, standing at the back of the room with her red pen still in hand, headset barely visible beneath her hair. It was not a long look. It was long enough. At the reception, Table 7 was set exactly as planned. Mara tracked everything through her headset, speaking quietly to Elena in the kitchen and Tobias near the service pass. The kitchen bell sequence that signaled each course, the service route that determined which server carried which tray, the linen fold that marked which dish belonged to which seat, the champagne timing that would not begin until both fathers had been served and cleared by visual confirmation. Livia did not touch the shellfish dish when it was offered. Her own meal note had already routed her plate elsewhere, exactly as designed. She did not drink the champagne when it arrived at her place setting. She watched the service door more than she watched the head table, the same rhythm Carlo had shown during the ceremony, and Mara understood that both of them were waiting for the same moment, from different angles, for different reasons. When the runner brought Vittorio Bellandi's plate to the service pass, the handoff point, the 11 to 14 second window Mara had identified as the only real vulnerability in the entire service chain. Livia shifted her chair 4 inches toward the aisle. Mara saw it through the gap in the curtain. She said into her headset, voice level, "Switch the father's plate now." Elena was already moving. She had been standing within arm's reach of that exact handoff point for the last 20 minutes, waiting, a duplicate plate already prepared and held back specifically for this moment. The swap took 6 seconds at the service pass, hidden by the natural chaos of a dozen plates moving at once during peak service, servers crossing paths, trays balanced at shoulder height, the specific organized confusion of a wedding reception in full swing. Livia did not see it happen. She was watching the wrong plate, the one she believed was marked, carried by the server she had been tracking since the appetizer course. She watched the server set what she believed was the compromised plate in front of Vittorio Bellandi. She waited. Carlo, 3 seats down at the family table, watched the same direction, waiting for a reaction that would let him begin the next phase of whatever speech he had prepared. The grief, the accusation, the carefully timed outrage that would turn a poisoning into a declaration of war before anyone could ask the right questions. Nothing happened. Vittorio Bellandi ate his appetizer with the unhurried satisfaction of a man enjoying good food at his daughter's wedding, and continued his conversation with the Falcone capo seated beside him about a shipping contract neither of them would remember discussing by morning. Carlo's color shifted, almost imperceptibly. The specific pallor of a man watching a plan that depended on a very precise timeline begin to come apart in real time, with no way to intervene without revealing that he had been watching for an intervention at all. Nico saw it. He had been watching Carlo as closely as Mara had been watching Livia, and the half-second of color loss told him everything the documents would later confirm. Mara did not announce anything. She walked to table 7 the way a planner checks on service, unhurried, professional, carrying a small folded card the way she might carry a place-setting correction or a timing update. Nothing that would alarm anyone watching from a distance. She set the card in front of Livia Carbone. Inside, a printed copy of the seating chart edit log, the timestamp of her addition circled in the same red ink Mara had used on every anomaly for the past 4 days. Mara said quietly, for Livia's ears alone, "You were added too late to be family and seated too carefully to be a guest." Livia's expression did not change immediately. It was the practiced stillness of someone who had been trained for exactly this kind of exposure, who understood that the first visible reaction was often the only one that mattered. Then she stood slowly with the specific calm of someone evaluating exits rather than panicking. Nico's men were already at both doors. Mara had positioned them there 20 minutes earlier, under the cover of routine reception security, with instructions that made sense only in hindsight. Carlo stood up immediately and announced, loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, and for the moment to spread through the reception like the specific kind of fire that started in whispers, that the Falcone kitchen had attempted to poison Don Bellandi. It was a good performance. Mara would have admired it under different circumstances. The timing, the volume calibrated to reach exactly the tables that mattered most, the genuine-sounding outrage of a man defending his uncle. She had prepared for exactly this. She laid out, in sequence, for the gathering crowd of capos and family members now turning to watch, the original untouched plate now secured in Elena's custody with a witnessed chain of evidence. The duplicate plate that had actually been served to Vittorio, also secured. The service pass camera footage, time-stamped, showing the swap and showing Livia's attention fixed on the wrong plate throughout. The seating chart edit log, the meal preference timestamp. The East Study door log, pulled under Bellandi authority, placing Carlo there within 4 minutes of the edit, and Father Matteo summoned forward, who confirmed in his careful clerical voice exactly what Vittorio's death at this table would have triggered under the alliance contract language he had drafted himself. She said, loud enough now for the room that needed to hear it, this wasn't an attack on the bride's family by the groom's family. It was a war invitation written into a seating chart. The silence that followed had weight, the specific silence of a room recalibrating who the dangerous person at the table had actually been all along. Nico wanted to end it immediately with his hands in front of everyone, the specific impulse of a man whose family had taught him that strength looked like swift, visible violence. Mara stopped him with one sentence. "If you kill him here, he becomes proof you had something to hide," she said, quiet enough that only he could hear it. "If you let the chart speak, he becomes the man who tried to murder his own uncle at his cousin's wedding." Nico looked at her, then at Carlo, who had gone very still, surrounded now by men who answered to a family he had just tried to destroy from the inside. He listened. Carlo was taken alive, escorted out through the same service corridor Mara had mapped 4 days earlier, past the kitchen where Elena watched him go without comment. Don Vittorio Bellandi looked at Mara across the room with the specific expression of a man recalculating who in this building actually deserved his trust, having spent 61 years assuming that trust belonged to people with titles and bloodlines rather than people with clipboards. He crossed the room toward her, slowly, the whole reception watching. He said, "The planner saved my life." Mara said, "The chart did. I just read it." 1 month later, Carlo Bellandi had been removed from succession entirely. His claim to any future leadership role dissolved the moment the evidence Mara had assembled reached the Bellandi family council. The Falcone-Bellandi alliance held, strengthened, if anything, by the fact that both families now understood exactly how close it had come to collapsing and exactly who had stopped it. Wedding and event security protocols across both families had been rewritten from the ground up. Seating chart review was no longer a planning afterthought. It was now a formal security function, audited and reviewed by someone trained to read it the way Mara had, as a map of intention rather than a list of names. Sophia was no longer just a bride exchanged between families to seal a contract. She had claimed, in the weeks following the wedding, an active liaison role between Falcone and Bellandi operations. A position built with the same quiet precision Mara had first noticed during a dress fitting, when a woman in a gown she hadn't chosen had asked an honest question and gotten an honest answer, for the first time in longer than she could remember. And Mara had been offered something new, event security consultant for alliance functions across multiple families, a title that did not contain the word planner anywhere in it, with a fee structure that reflected exactly how much a seating chart could be worth when someone finally understood what it was actually for. Nico found her in a warehouse being converted for the next alliance dinner. String lights half installed overhead, folding tables stacked against one wall, the specific organized chaos of an event still 3 weeks from completion. He set a document on the table in front of her, a seating chart, but the title at the top read, "Security Flow by Mara Ellis, not Flowers, not Planner." He said, "I was wrong about what you do." "You were wrong about what a room is," Mara said, without looking up from the chart she was reviewing. "A battlefield? A confession." She finally looked at him. If people want something badly enough, they show you where they intend to sit. He absorbed that the way he had learned to absorb most things she said now, slowly, and with the understanding that it would still be true tomorrow. Nico asked her to dinner. Mara looked at the chart between them, at the half-finished room around them, at the man who 4 weeks ago had told her to pick expensive flowers and let the adults work. Is this a date or a security consult? A request. Then ask without sounding like you're assigning me a table. He paused, recalibrated, the way she had watched him recalibrate a dozen times since the wedding, slower than she would have liked at first, faster every time after. Would you have dinner with me, Mara? She picked up her red pen and circled a small table on the diagram in front of her. 2 place settings, away from the doors, away from the kitchen, away from every sightline she would have flagged as a risk in any other context. Table for 2, she said. Not near an exit. She looked up at him. I'm off duty. Nico almost smiled. The version she had learned to recognize over the past month, the one that meant something had landed exactly where she'd aimed it. Nico Falcone had hired Mara Ellis to make his brother's wedding look peaceful. He learned too late that peace was never in the flowers, the music, or the silk on the tables. Peace was in the chart, in who was close enough to kill, who was far enough to lie, and who had been added after everyone stopped looking. They mocked her as a flower girl with spreadsheets. By midnight, the plus-size wedding planner had saved a Don, a bride, an alliance, and a city from a war hidden in Table 7. If you found one stranger hidden inside a Mafia wedding seating chart, would you move the chair, or let the killer sit down long enough to expose who sent them? Tell me in the comments, when did you first realize Table 7 was not a mistake? Subscribe to Underworld Desire for more Mafia romance stories about underestimated women who see the danger powerful men miss.